Okay, so I'm going to open it up straight up to you guys. So if you have questions.
So, thank you, Rebecca. I was at Le Lieu at that time. I was also at the 100 Jours de l'Art Contemporain. It was in 1990 in Montreal, and there was Edouard Poitras and Domingo Cisneros, and Domingo blocked his installation at that time. And Edouard, who was the great friend of Joe David, you can see Joe David in the Alanis Obama-Sawin. He's with Kalashnikov. We don't know who shot, but 2 years after, Joe David was shot in the neck and he became paraplegic. So Edouard works with him a lot of years. And myself, I made a performance, Peut-on réparer Joe David? Because pendant cette arcade crisis, there was also, it was the beginning of two things. Struggle or beginning healing. And that was, I think, a large part of Aboriginal art during the years after. So for me, I saw Dana Williams broke by alcohol after he was under the barricade. We make 8 hours of discussion in the circle with Alanis Obama-Sawin in 1992. I think you were there. So it was really difficult, and at the same time, for me, there is before and after kind of starting crisis. So today, and in 1992, with my brother Yves, it was the great celebration of supposed discovering of America. So we made Le Porteur des Peines du Monde right in the center of Montreal. It was a theater, tragedy, but it was where there is now le Quartier des Spectacles. But at that time, it was the real warriors who were around to get people inside. It was not theater. It was a close on theater and reality. So I think it's really important. The reenactment is also a kind of Yahweh Yare.
I'm going to ask a question then while you guys think. I'm curious about, because it is that kind of event, right? There is nothing, it marks a change, it marks a division, we're always going to come back to it. But we're talking about art as well and its relationship. And just maybe really specifically, what do you think shifted like so radically after Oka for art? Because it feeds into the 1992 and feeds into the many things that came after, right?
For my section, my answering of this question, I'd like to pass the mic to someone else who has a couple of words to say. Yeah. We just talked about this morning.
I'm sorry.
we just talked about this morning.
I told you there would be no
amazing. You said this amazing couple of sentences. You don't have to give a presentation, but you said.
Hello. I teach at Brandon University. We have an Aboriginal Arts program, and I teach a class called Contemporary Aboriginal Art History, and I teach a lecture or a component called Art After Oka, and that's what Scavanati is talking about, because definitely, in my opinion, it had a profound impact on the arts, just looking at it from an art historical perspective. And one thing I think we can't forget, or one thing that motivates me to talk about it, is the fact that there were artists behind the lines, like Bradley LaRocque, Joe David, Ellen Gabriel was an artist as well. There were about 5. There were artists like Karen Huska, who was crawling, bringing food to warriors, apparently. There was Ryan Scavanati, who I met after Oka, and who had created Nation to Nation. And it just seemed, it was Oka, Task Force, facilitated by Leanne Martin, and then the quincentennial celebrations. So, is that what you wanted me to say?
That's exactly it.
Okay, thank you.
Now
Merci.
I guess speaking about, like I did mention that, you know, being Mohawk, we live in this volatile province of Quebec, and working really hard to try to make things happen here in Quebec was something that I worked with Scavanati, with Arthur, Eric Robertson, and some other people through Concordia as well, through the First Nations
Assembly First Nations Concordia.
So we came together, I think, more cohesively after. It did begin prior to, but I look back and, you know, it's interesting to hear last night that the McCord says they're on board to show Aboriginal art. The Montreal Arts Council, I think, was there talking about these initiatives that they were doing when we couldn't even get a grant in because it wasn't written in French. There was no program officers that Aboriginal people could talk to, maybe the Francophone side, but not in English. So there's these things that seem to me coming way too late. It's 2014, this was 1990. We've seen change across Canada in many ways. We've seen, and you know, the quincentennial happened, so that sort of brought more attention that was coming forth through OCA, and then that stopped. SCANA stopped. The exhibition stopped. And people were sort of on their own in many ways to deal with the legacy that was brought forward by the work that people have laid in foundations. And I think Land Spirit Power was sort of the pinnacle of, because it was at the National Gallery. Here in Montreal, we did start Nation to Nation because we were looking at, you know, the importance of art not being used as a social service model, which was part of this healing process that people kept talking, you know, bringing to us. And, you know, and especially in Kahnawake, it was about, you know, it was constant. It was somebody was constantly smudging you. Somebody was constantly. And working in a high school, you know, the students didn't know what was going on. There was hatred and there was these fear, and we still had to go to Chateauguay and shop at Steinberg's. We still had to cross the bridge. I came to my classes at Concordia. They're like, "You're not registered. You know, you're not a student anymore." And I'm like, "It was called the crisis. Didn't you hear about it?" So there was all these things happening, but it didn't move fast. I think another sort of moment that happened here was an exhibition called Art Mohawk 1992 at the Strathern Center, which is now the Mai. And it included artists from Kahnawake, Kanesatake, and Akwesasne who came together. So it was a huge show. And through that, I think people were just wanting to move on. The work wasn't about, this is what happened to us. The work was still about, this is who we are, this is our territory, this is our place. So I think that we move forward in that way, in our own terms that I mentioned earlier, but I still don't think Quebec is at a place that it should have been, or should be, given that the situation happened 10 minutes from here, 20 minutes from here.
Hopefully it'll lead to a question. I just had a total shiver going through my body earlier on, and realized that OCA affected people in Calgary, people like me, Métis people, and I didn't even know it till just now, because in around 91, Shirley Bear and some big Indian guy from Mohawk guy, it could have been Bradley, but he's from somebody, they came and did a presentation in the new gallery in Calgary. They set up barricades. They were shouting and anger. There was so much anger at that time, and they were separating the Indigenous from the non-Indigenous people. I couldn't move. And just now thinking about it, this led to my coming out as a Métis guy with Cheryl Rondell the next year, or that year, and Min Kwan Panchayat, and all these things that I didn't even connect to this moment. And so this notion that it became a stimulus, I'm just trembling right now thinking about this. But my question was, has art become a solve at absorbing this energy, or is it provoking the next stage of resistance, or are we just absorbing all the stress and the anxiety?
Anyways, I was just thinking about this image, the megaphone, or Ayumi Awachimamama one, which is speaking to their mother in Ojibwe. was a work that came in 1991, so like 1 year after. And so for me, as you know, I would be 31 at the time, I was really affected by what had happened, by the Oka crisis. And I think that it really changed my work for the good. It made me a stronger and much better artist, I believe. So I really think that, I believe that would be true for a lot of people. So I think that, yeah, out of this kind of crazy hatred can come good things. And through that, you know, trying to spin the hideous reality into something strong, positive, and powerful. And so for me, this idea of the voice, our voice, this land, our voice on this land, it's really what came to me out of that situation as an artist. So.
As well, I think it's important to acknowledge at that time during what happened in Ganasatagi and Ganawagi is that up in northern Cree territory there was a hydroelectric project that was there. The government was trying to push through, and at that time, as it is now, it was a conservative majority government. Brian Mulroney was prime minister, and they were pushing through a lot of projects like that. That got a lot of resistance as well. Like it was being that hydroelectric project up there was being protested down in New York City. They paddled a canoe from James Bay through the inland water canal system all the way to New York. So that was getting in the news. Folk celebrities were getting involved. I think Bruce Cockburn was involved in that, and Jackson Brown, as well as one of the Kennedy sons. So there was that going on. The Meech Lake Accord had happened. Elijah Harper had squashed that when Quebec was wanting to become a distinct society. So that was happening at that time. In the territory that I come from, in Kitimat, there was a hydroelectric project there that was wanting to be developed as well, that Alcan was pushing through. And that was stopped because it was brought up that a fraud had happened when the first project had happened, and they flooded the whole community of Cheslata people out, and it came forward that it was the government lied about it, and it was proven in court. So that was stopped all at the same time that was going on. So there was a lot of things that were happening at that time that I find today there seems to be a lot of apathy towards Stephen Harper's government generally, although there are, you can see her shaking her head from this because, well, you can apologize all you want, but of course there's Idle No More, which we're all familiar with. I mean, that catalyst has been happening as well. There's a lot of things that are sort of going on, but at the same time, you know, it needs to happen on a larger level. Like, where is it going to go from here? Like, you know, the educational institutions are a catalyst for young minds, and this is where a lot of us we all went to art school, you know. Both Ryan and I went to Concordia. There's OCAD. You went to Concordia as well. And while we were being educated, a lot of these events had happened, and I'm wondering, like, I have a question for the audience. Where is it going for you from here? I mean, like, how does Idle No More sit with you? Like, there's is that an event? Is it a catalyst? Maybe Wanda can speak towards that. Like, where can we go from here, from Oka to now? Where does it go from here?
I can't answer that big question, but I guess why I was shaking my head a little bit was because I think one of the relationships between is because there were actions all the way across the country in support of what was going on in Quebec. And that's what I feel like that network and all those power lines between our communities, Idle No More has grown that back again. So that when the Mi'kmaq are fighting fracking, there was actions all the way across the country in support of that, and that helped them win, helped them defeat that company. So even though that company will move to another community, I think that there is some hope for me, because, from my point of view, because of that network and the way that people are willing to do this kind of work. And there's communities that are now willing to be arrested and willing to, inhabit their own governance systems, and actually instead of looking for recognition, they're asserting sovereignty, and that means we have to be criminalized, and that has been the case all the way through. Then that's what's going to happen. Just means we have to risk our bodies and we have to go to jail. That's all I got to say.
I will just raise my hand in response to that question of where are we going to go from here. That was kind of the whole point of this. There's a whole bunch of projects going on about I don't know more and things. What can we bring forward? What's the language, the symbolic language from these previous resistance moments that we're bringing forward? And I was exploring that with this theater project, this I don't know more after the fire, and that was the question we asked more or less. Like the 3 questions were, how do we get to this point? Super open. What does this moment mean to you, and where do you want to go from here? But those answers that you get in response just by asking, yeah, those are your answers. Those are your real answers to that question. And you realize we have really simple signifiers. And I'm kind of interested in your youth, the work with your youth too, because I know you work, Scavanati, with youth also. And talking about how do they approach this subject matter right now, and what are those defining what's the defining imagery? Like, what are the things that we can use to maintain momentum with basic symbols? You know?
That's a great question.
The people we've been working with, the young people we've been working with have thus far been like 90% all from Ganawage. They've been quite depoliticized. I've been quite surprised. And I mean, in that they're not talking about sovereignty, and they're not talking about idle no more, and they're not talking even fight the power. But what they are doing is they're politicized in the way that most Indigenous people are, because we are very interested in survival, or this word survivance, which I'm just learning, or what I would prefer is thriving. I mean, I think they're really interested in knowing what their traditions are, and their language. It's actually, there's even scariness to it. Like I heard the other day this young woman say, "Oh, if we don't speak our languages, we're not Mohawk." They're you know, yeah. So that's scary because it's. Oh, anyway, I don't know if I have to explain why to you. So it's interesting because yeah, we have the unity flag. I've always called it the warrior flag, but that's right there in our community. It was born there. And it's not, I don't feel it's something that they are claiming as Ganawage Runu youth. But so it's an interesting question, and you can even ask, like, should we rally around an image? Yeah. But thanks. And I just wanted to say a little thing about, I'm not even sure if I have a good answer for you, David. But it's a great conversation to start, and I think it'd be nice if we could talk about it in a larger group, because you and I have access to one another. We can chat anytime, almost anytime. But so is art just absorbing it, like basically helping to absorb the hurt, right, is what you kind of meant, and sort of taking the load off of actual maybe political will, yeah. Or are we catalysts for it? And I mean, I guess the answer, it has to be both. And sometimes neither, right? Sometimes I'm just like, I think what my process is just like, sometimes it's in there, 20 years worth of Oka crisis, information, feelings. I cried so much making that episode. And it just came out, and I didn't do it in such a way like, oh, I'm gonna say this so that one day I'll be able to explain the Oka crisis to a group of people. It was just like it came in an order that it needed to come out in, And I don't call it healing, even though I'm talking about crying. I just mean it's my job. I feel as artists, that's what we do. We respond. Sometimes it takes a long time.
I think all of your work is a catalyst for social change. I just want to say that as someone who came a couple of years after a few of you. I really appreciated that, and I always, in Montreal, as a student who came shortly after the 3 of you had graduated from Concordia, there's always this contemplation of the impact it had on you and how you moved forward as someone who came shortly after you. And Wanda was talking about that we will use our bodies and we will go to jail. And
Not all of us.
Not all of us, but there is that.
There's always a small number that make that choice.
But as someone who came shortly after the resistance and after you had graduated, there were always these stories in the art history department or fine arts department about what Indigenous students endured at Concordia during that time. Like, what was it like literally walking, well, not in this building, but over there, what was it like going through that as an Indigenous fine art student? Because you did have targets on your back. Can you share that? Because that's an important part of this, I think. Marcy?
I would have to say that the daily drive, and then later I moved here a couple of years after the crisis, to get from Kahnawake to Montreal is an ordeal. For something that's only 6 kilometers to downtown from my mom's house to here is an ordeal. And it's always been because you had to rely on public transportation, which brought your neighboring community through the reserve. You had to flag down a bus because the bus wasn't going to stop for you. You basically had to throw yourself. So I used to hitchhike a lot to the city just to get a ride over. But there was this anxiety that was constant that I grew up with to get to the city. Once I was here, it's interesting that, because I went to school at Dawson College down the road and came here as well, Kahnawake and Kanesatake was so far away from people's reality in the downtown core, at Dawson College, at Concordia. A lot of people didn't even know the geography of Montreal. So there wasn't much, you didn't have, there wasn't, it felt more safe once I got from getting my way here to landing here. It was always about that resistance that always happened between Chateauguay and Kahnawake for me, because we also went to high school there at some point. There was always a resistance of there was always something. And that's normal for most neighboring communities that are next to a reserve or reservation. There was a lot of support with the faculty in the arts. People were on our side. So I think it was a way to maneuver around easily. And like I said, I came back to school in September sometime. They deregistered me or whatever. They took me out of the classes because I was like, they said you didn't get your stuff in time. I'm like, we had no mail system. There was no internet. So that was sort of the experience.
When I first moved here, I was going out to the peace camps that were out at Oka, and it was with a group of us. There were a number of us that were going out there, and I had my camera and I was taking a lot of photographs. And at that time, the police were on heightened observation status, or whatever you want to call it. But at one point, I was staying with my friend Eric Robertson. It was funny, on the way here, I dropped by his old flat. It's still there with the same turquoise door, 1221 Drummond Street. I went in there at that time with my backpack, with my camera and all my film. And he and I had a discussion, and it was right after we came back from the peace camp. We went down the road for a few hours, and we came back to his apartment, and somebody had broken in. And somebody had stolen my backpack with all of my camera gear and all of my negatives. And the more Eric sort of studied his apartment, money was left behind, objects that were worth anything were left behind, and anything with handwriting was taken. And we realized quickly that it was actually CSIS that came in and broke into the apartment and took all of our stuff. And not long after that, I was enrolled at Concordia, and a lot of the professors were approached, and I was reminded today, I think it was Kathy, we were talking about this, that the professors were approached by the police to offer any information on any Native students that were in any of their classes, and not only supply their name, but also their contact numbers and addresses. So we were being policed, but at that time, the professors obviously, at that time, said absolutely not. You know, they totally refused. And so that's the kind of situation that we were under. We were completely under surveillance with any of our activities, and we're sabotaged. Like my only way of communication through visual arts, like I was studying photography, my way of making work was taken from me. And I had to find another way of sort of following through to continue with work. So those were the kinds of things we were faced with, let alone like heated discussions. And the other thing that Ryan brought up that reminded me totally that, yeah, the professors were on our side, which became a bit of a problem in a learning institution, only in that there was, as a Native person wanting to learn and be challenged, sometimes it felt like there was no challenge. It was like, you're doing great, keep on doing what you're doing. Is just as frustrating, not being able to get any feedback that anybody else would get feedback. People are afraid to criticize some of us sometimes. So the best way to deal with that is rock the boat a bit and provoke reaction. Yeah. Or behind your back, even your best friends. Anyhow, that was my experience.
I don't have much to add. I was blissfully unaware of this thing you just mentioned about the teachers being approached. I do remember my teachers saying, because I love bright colors, can you tell? And, you know, my teachers would be like, why don't you add, like, use more natural materials? Dude, I love plastic. So, but on the other, so this Assembly of First Nations Concordia, I'm pretty sure it was pretty unfortunately named. It was not like a sort of little subsidiary. It was not like actually affiliated with the Assembly of First Nations. Yeah, we had, yeah. So we, you know, that was pretty amazing. That's what I kind of want to mention. So I didn't have pretty much any negative anything about that. But, you know, I mean, by joining it, you know, it did awaken a more, we were already, I feel we were political. In my family, I thought all Mohawks were, I thought that was part of my Mohawk being. But like, I now know that it was actually, it's not everybody. And, you know, so I had already been a peace activist in high school for nuclear disarmament. But at that point, we had achieved our goal. No.
Shit.
Imagine.
It's another one of our fights.
Anyway, I just really wanted to say that I worked at, you know, I'm just like reminiscing really, but you know, it was really wonderful to meet these people there at Concordia. Became lifelong friends and colleagues. Have made so much happen, you know, and I'm very thankful. So yeah, the good, you know, the good that comes from the suck.
Yeah, it's not really a question, it's just more of a comment added to the discussion. On the way here, on the flight here, I was finished watching my very bad movie, and I decided to start watching the documentaries that were on the plane there. And the one I started watching was 1960, some kind of black history, and how the protests, the riots, the awfulness that all happened across the states, inspired by the 3 students who were killed around that time. It really got me thinking about, well, what about us? Like, how long has it taken for us? And we're still continuing. Like, it feels like for Aboriginal people, it's still really, really shaky right now. It just feels like it's like longer and quieter. So even though all the stuff has happened, I was just trying to think of the question of how we're addressing this through our art. And for me, like, thinking about Winnipeg, and right now there's so much stuff going on there. It's crazy. Like, they're dragging the Red River right now while the museum's opening up, you know. So it's really kind of important, but emotionally exhaustive work. I'm thinking the Walking with Our Sisters that we put on this year, it was incredible, really emotional. It took a lot out of all of us. So yeah, I just try to think about what kind of projects kind of inspire conversation and dialogue, but also, like, I still want to see art. I still want to have fun with art, so it's trying to negotiate between those two. That's all I have to say.
Okay, we have to close this panel, but I just wanted to see if any of you have one sentence that you would say to the next generation. Any of you have one sentence, so we can close it on a certain way. One sentence. Come on, Rebecca.
I say, art is good and life is great.